Welcome, student. Go ahead and step away from the noise of the bustling world for a little bit. Come sit by the water's edge with me and just listen closely, the way an apprentice listens to an elder storyteller. Because today, in this explainer, we're tracing an ancient path. We're looking at a power that actually predates the very thrones trying to rule our world right now. We are talking about Auren Vel, the master of rivers. You know, when we look back at the absolutely devastating history of the War of Crowns, it's so easy to get caught up in the grand battles, the shifting borders, and the terrifying destructive magic of those demonic lords. But the rivers? The rivers are something else entirely. They aren't weapons that a king or duke can just claim to own. They are the Earth's oldest witnesses. They carry memory all the way from the highest, snow-capped mountain right down to the deepest sea. And believe me, they know exactly how to move around every single throne ever built.
And that brings us to a really fundamental question. In fact, it's a question that every scholar studying the Natural Powers Codex has to grapple with eventually. How do you fight a throne that cannot be drowned? Just imagine the sheer, unfiltered arrogance of the demon crowns. They wield this absolute, terrifying power, and they demand total, unquestioning obedience. But here's the thing. Long before those demon crowns even started counting their legions, the Earth already held a secret to surviving that exact kind of absolute power. And it's a secret literally written in water.
The absolute core of that secret is this idea right here. A river doesn't need to defeat a throne in one single massive blow. Instead, it can surround it, it can feed beneath it, erode it, expose its foundations, and eventually carry its very name away. This right here, this is the absolute foundation of river law. It's this patient, deeply inevitable force that completely outlasts the frantic, desperate demands of pride and kingship. Think about how a demonic lord fights. If they want to strike down an enemy, it's sudden, it's violent, it's designed to induce immediate paralyzing terror. But Auren Vel, he operates on a completely different timeline. Think of how water-eroding stone eventually breaks down the absolute hardest rock, or how a slow leak can shatter a supposedly unbreakable iron cage from beneath just by patiently rusting the lock. River law uses that exact kind of patient pressure to wear down sudden dominance. It's the profound wisdom of surviving simply by outlasting the storm.
Now, to really understand Auren Vel, you actually have to understand what he is not. He doesn't just command all water everywhere. He isn't some blanket god of every drop of moisture. For instance, the rain plummeting down from the sky, that answers to the storm master. The vast, deep, unfathomable oceans, those answer to the sea master. Even those hidden, dark wells buried deep beneath the crust of the earth answer to the stone master. So what exactly is Auren Vel's specific domain? Well, he rules movement with direction. He governs that long, continuous, unstoppable path from the source all the way to the mouth. He rules the journey from silence to speech, from the deep wound upon the earth to the final, indisputable witness of whatever caused it. He's not a soldier you can just give orders to. He is an elder that you absolutely must listen to.
And this leads us to something incredible, the mythic principle of the first bend. Now, the absolute oldest stories we have say that before demons even possessed names or ranks, the earth was cracked open by a massive, catastrophic wound. The mountains stood tall and proud, the stones were completely silent, and when the very first water began to move, it didn't just rush straight into that fatal, violent wound to die. No, it bent. The very first lesson of river power is written right there in the dirt. When straight, rigid force smashes itself into pieces against resistance, flowing force simply turns. It studies the obstacle. It genuinely understands the resistance in front of it, and then it becomes an entirely new path. It actively avoids direct, fatal conflict.
That is the true essence of the first bend. It's this beautiful principle that true power doesn't always have to push back directly to be effective. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is survive and adapt by turning away from a conflict that would otherwise destroy you. And honestly, this is the origin story of Auren Vel. This is how he was born. He wasn't born as flesh and blood or even as some spirit you could just hack at with a sword. He was born as a memory of direction. A memory that inherently, fundamentally rejected the arrogance of direct, destructive strikes. Think about human history. When the first human kings decided to build bridges and stubbornly claim ownership of the riverbanks, the river just let them. Sure, go ahead. But then when flood season arrived, the river gently, and sometimes, very forcefully, reminded those kings that a bridge is basically just a polite request made of water. Because water always remembers where the lower ground is.
I want you to really consider the massive contrast we're looking at here. On one side of the board, we have the demonic crowns. These are creatures that rely entirely on their own pride, on deep, dark manipulation, and on this totally obsessive ranking system. They need to be called dukes, kings, presidents. They need that validation. On the exact opposite side, we have Auren Vel. His power comes from natural authority and sheer inevitability. And here's the real kicker. Because you cannot buy a river with shiny titles, and you cannot flatter a current with a higher rank, the master of rivers completely unravels the demon's entire obsession with hierarchy and control. It makes their rank entirely irrelevant. A king of hell might stand on the bank and scream orders until he's blue in the face, but the river is just going to flow right past him. Auren Vel doesn't need to outrank a duke to defy him, because he belongs to a completely different order of power entirely. He is law, without a throne.
So, what does he look like? Well, to look upon Auren Vel is literally to look into a mirror. His shifting form depends entirely on what the witness actually needs to understand at that moment, not what their ego desires to see. To just an everyday, ordinary human, he might show up as the morning mist rising off the water, or maybe a child stacking stones in the stream, or just a quiet old ferryman. He doesn't carry weapons, he doesn't posture, but to those who are deeply entrenched in the toxic war of crowns, his appearance shifts. To them, he becomes this profound, often terrifying reflection of their own internal rot and their own inescapable flaws. And to the great demons, this mirror effect is absolutely maddening. Take Baal, for example. Baal is a demon who is completely obsessed with invisibility and control. So when he looks at Auren Vel, he sees an impossible crown made entirely of current, something Baal can never ever grab hold of or measure. Then you have Paimon, who commands attention and hoarding knowledge. To him, the river looks like a moving library where the pages are just silver fish swimming away. Belial, the literal embodiment of overwhelming, destructive royal fire, looks at Auren Vel and sees a mirror that simply refuses to catch fire. It's completely unburvable. And Valak, the president of serpents, who absolutely thrives on confusion, he sees a two-headed current that's laughing upstream while simultaneously carrying secrets downstream. To all these demonic lords, Auren Vel is a terrifying reflection of their own nature, mostly because he represents a force that just refuses to stand still long enough to be possessed, manipulated, or bossed around. All of this naturally leads us to what might be the most fascinating aspect of his power. We call it river memory. Now, don't picture a dusty room full of books. This is a moral geography. It actually preserves the literal pressure of human suffering. It holds on to local truths and traces the exact path by which deeply hidden causes finally reach their visible consequences. The demons figured out pretty early on that they could twist human words, they could burn paper documents, and they could easily terrorize mortal witnesses into silence. But you know what they can't burn? River memory. Auren Vel is the ultimate witness to the War of Crowns. He carries the bitter taste of ash from their false miracles. He holds the frantic fleeing footsteps of terrified refugees, and he preserves the cold shivers of exploited villages long, long after the palaces and the kings have completely forgotten those people ever existed.
Let me give you some concrete examples of how this works. A long time ago, lesser demons used to think they were so clever. They thought they could just wash their crimes away by throwing marked, stolen objects into a fast-moving river. Out of sight, out of mind, right? They were entirely, spectacularly wrong. The water doesn't hide those crimes. It explicitly exposes those hidden bargains. It mercilessly carries the physical proof of guilt straight downstream and drops it right into the laps of the exact people owed justice. So a ring taken from a murdered official, it mysteriously winds up tangled in a poor, honest fisherman's net. A stolen sacred temple seal, it gets lodged perfectly beneath the bridge of the one righteous judge left in town. A coin used to seal a demonic bargain, it turns pitch black right inside the drinking cup of the corrupt minister who paid it out. Manipulators absolutely despise this water. And why? Because Auren Vel doesn't accuse you by shouting from the heavens, he accuses you with undeniable physical arrival.
There's a story that captures this perfectly, my student. Listen to this. Shortly after the Treaty of Ash, a lesser demon decided to get clever and manipulated a corrupt human governor into damming up a major river. The strategy was cruel but simple. Starve the downstream villages of water so they'd be forced into absolute desperate dependency on the governor. The demon planned to just sit back and feast on all that human fear and begging. So how did Auren Vel respond? Did he send an army of water elementals? Did he summon a massive, violent flash flood to smash the dam? Nope. He sent silt. Patient, quiet, unassuming mud. Slowly, inch by inch, day by day, the reservoir behind the dam just filled with mud. Eventually, the corrupt governor's grand monument was transformed into nothing more than a completely useless wall built around his own failure. The locals, they just called it a bizarre engineering accident. But the demons? Oh, the demons, they knew. They knew it was the inescapable, patient judgment of the river.
Think back to that analogy of water eroding stone to break a cage. That's exactly what's happening here. The steady, unbroken flow of the river steadily breaks down the psychological cages built by these tyrants. Demonic power is all about paralysis. It's about delay, shock, and sudden terrifying dominance meant to freeze you in place. But the flow of the river is the power to simply continue, to keep moving. That erosion is patient pressure that inevitably wears away at demonic pride. Plus, on a very literal level, the river acts as a physical boundary. It stops these arrogant crowns from just marching their armies into lands where they aren't invited. It provides a constant rolling purification. Not that it makes people morally perfect, but it represents the steady movement away from rot, constantly carrying away those toxic whispers planted by lesser manipulators.
Now, you might be wondering, what happens when human hands actually try to touch this kind of power? Well, we have to talk about Illian Mar. Illian was a human who was walking around with a terrible burden. He literally had the destructive fire of Belial's ember burning inside his chest. It was this highly dangerous, borrowed royal magic. Illian was terrified he was going to turn into a living weapon, so he was sent out to find the river. He was warned, a fire that cannot hear water will eventually mistake every room for an enemy. So, Illian travels until he reaches a ruined river crossing, and there he meets Auren Vel. But Auren Vel just looks like a simple, tired old ferryman. The ferryman doesn't ask for gold, he doesn't ask for a favor, he only asks Illian to do one thing: place his burning hand directly into the flowing current. And the moment he did, Illian was immediately subjected to the trial of the three currents. This wasn't a physical fight, it was a profound reckoning. First, the source current hit him. It was clear,
freezing cold, and it forced Ilion to look dead on at his true motives. It stripped away his excuses and showed him his fear, his compassion, and his own pride. You can't pretend in the source current. Second, the bend current grabbed him. It moved sideways, pulling him off balance, teaching him that brilliant strategy of the first bend, turning rather than fighting head-on. It taught him that river wisdom is about finding the path that power forgot to guard. And finally, the dark mouth current washed over him, revealing the absolute hardest truth of all. Every single gift, every ounce of power Ilion held, wasn't his to keep. They weren't possessions. They were massive responsibilities just moving through him, destined to arrive at a final consequence. When Ilion finally pulled his hand out of the water, Belial's ember had changed. It no longer burned like some arrogant, greedy crown. It glowed softly and responsibly, like a hot coal wrapped safely in a wet cloth.
Now, it's also important to understand that Auren Vel isn't just some solitary dictator wandering the banks. He has a court. But as you can probably guess by now, it is completely unlike any demonic throne room you've ever heard of. The river court essentially materializes wherever moving water happens to be witnessing the truth. There are the reed scribes, plants that actually record spoken words in the specific leaning angles of their stalks. There are the silver witnesses, fish swimming in the deep whose very scales reflect the last faces seen by drowned secrets. You have the mud judges who perfectly preserve the desperate footprints of those fleeing injustice, and the fairy shades who quietly guide the lost away from the traps set by demons. And here's the brilliant part. Not a single one of these beings can be commanded or bribed by any human king or demon lord. Their total inability to be bribed renders demonic rank completely and utterly useless. It makes the river court one of the most unpredictable, incorruptible forces standing against the 72 demons.
So, hearing all of this, listening to these stories of undeniable power, you might be sitting there wondering, okay, but can a river actually be defeated? Is Auren Vel truly invincible against the demonic crowns? It is absolutely vital, my student, that we understand the full picture here. Because the truth is, yes, even this ancient natural power has its banks, it has its limitations, and it has its vulnerabilities. Auren Vel is not an absolute, omnipresent God who can fix everything everywhere all at once.
The river's voice actually thins out and fades wherever water is entirely cut off from memory. We're talking about places like dead, stagnant canals choked with ash, or perfectly sealed artificial metal chambers deep underground. He might be able to send a faint dream there, but he cannot manifest his true presence. Furthermore, and this is crucial, Auren Vel cannot and will not purify a choice that a human stubbornly continues to love for its corruption. Think about it. If the leaders of a city wake up every single morning and willingly pour poison into their own drinking water, completely refusing to change their ways, the river stops trying to heal them. At that point, it just becomes a stern, silent witness against them. Auren Vel simply refuses to be used as a convenient cleanup service for repeated, intentional harm.
And acknowledging those limitations brings us to one of the greatest, most legendary confrontations recorded in the entire Codex. The great demon Belial, the literal, terrifying embodiment of royal destructive fire, personally marched down to the riverbank to test Auren Vel's power. Belial fully expected his overwhelming infernal presence to make the water instantly boil away into steam. I mean, his flames had consumed entire royal courts and human armies before. Why would a river be any different? But the river didn't boil. It didn't hiss or steam. It simply moved around Belial's reflection, breaking his terrifying image into 1,000 little, incomplete, harmless pieces. Auren Vel didn't bow to the demon, but he didn't attack him either. Instead, the water simply delivered this profound, quiet truth. Fire proves what can burn. Water proves what remains after burning. And for the very first time in his existence, Belial actually understood the concept of consequence. He turned around and left the riverbank entirely without his usual rage.
Remember when Ilyanmar asked if this natural power could finally defeat the demons? Auren Vel looked at him and said that defeat is a tiny narrow word loved only by crowns. The river doesn't defeat the mountain it cuts through, right? It leaves it fundamentally changed. It feeds the forest along the way. It carries the names of the dead out to the sea. The true lasting lesson here is that river power does not make you invincible. It makes you fully, undeniably accountable. Embracing the law of the current isn't about achieving dominance. It's not about planting a flag and claiming victory over the landscape. It is about accepting the heavy, sacred burden of carrying the truth onward, patiently and relentlessly, no matter what obstacles are placed in your way.
And so, my student, as our time here by the water draws to a close, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought. It's something to just sit with and ponder as you watch the river flowing past us right now. Auren Vel once said, "If demons come as crowns, let crowns learn what water does to gold when gold falls into mud." I want you to think about that. What truly happens to absolute arrogant power when it finally, inevitably sinks beneath the crushing weight of its own current? The unseen realm felt a massive shift that day. The War of Crowns was introduced to a brand new law. Not every power wears a shiny crown, and absolutely no crown can cross the water entirely unchanged. Keep that lesson close to your chest, and whatever you face out there, never ever forget the law of the current.